One of the mysteries in the story of Exodus is why it takes the Israelites 3 generations to cross a relatively trivial stretch of desert. So what's the narrative explanation? So it's twofold. Remember in the account when after Moses encounters the burning bush and gets to the bottom of something and learns, which is what that story means, he goes back to get the Pharaoh to change his mind. But he doubles down, the Pharaoh. And that's the consequence of the ever-accelerating sequence of plagues. And the first 8 plagues destroy the present, and the last plague, which is the death of the firstborn, destroys the future. And it isn't until the present and the future are destroyed, heaven and earth both, plus the future, that the Pharaoh relents. And even then he doesn't, right? Because he sends his army after the Israelites once they do depart. Right now, the question is, why do people double down instead of changing? Even in the face of accelerating evidence of error. Okay, so the Israelites leave, right? So now they are escaping their tyranny and their slavedom. And that's a dynamic, right? Because there's no tyrants without willing slaves, and vice versa. And so the Israelites have plenty to learn too. And so the first thing that happens to them is the chaos of the Red Sea, and that's chaos and blood. Why? Because when you change your mind, the first thing that happens is things fall apart. And so, right, and then they cross the Red Sea and they manage that successfully. So that's that chaotic threshold. And then they wander in the goddamn desert for 3 generations. Right, why? Because at least under the tyranny, they knew what to do. And in the wilderness, they are fractious, resentful, immature, and unable to govern themselves. And it takes 3 generations before they recover. So, and you know, I talked to Carl Friston about this, and Carl's a neuroscientist of some repute. And he has an entropy theory of anxiety, which is and I had worked on a parallel theory in my lab in Montreal. We published a paper on it not too long before I departed for parts unknown. Your beliefs are game principles, like game rules, that bring order to complexity. And if you're wrong, you have to modify. And the consequence of modification first is an encounter with unstructured entropy and chaos. And that, the apprehension of that, locks people into their tyranny, self-imposed, familial, cultural, whatever. So it's never from where you are to the promised land. It's always from where you are through the threshold of chaos into the goddamn desert, and then maybe forward.
So in chapter 7 of The Parasitic Mind, where I talk about how to seek truth, I open up the chapter with a long quote by Leon Festinger, the pioneer of theory of cognitive dissonance, and it exactly speaks to your point. So the chaos that you're talking about with the Red Sea and so on in the biblical story is the chaos that you experience internally when you are faced with a dissonant amount of evidence that is contrary to the one that you hold so dear to you. And so it is no accident that this incredible quote by Leon Festinger, I obviously don't have it memorized here, but basically he's saying that there is no ends to which people will go to in order to maintain the coherence of their current belief system, irrespective of the amount of contrary evidence that they are exposed to, because then that triggers cognitive dissonance. And as a matter of fact, paradoxically, what often happens, as I'm sure you know, Jordan, when I expose you to contrary information, it only solidifies your position. So you could imagine how disheartening it is, right? I'm coming at you with a mind vaccine that hopefully gets you to perhaps revisit some of your, cherished beliefs.
You mean like a university professor should?
like a university professor should. And what it ends up happening is exactly opposite to that. It only emboldens you in your position. It only solidifies that you were right, despite the fact that I've shown you that you were perfectly wrong. And so at times it can seem like an insurmountable struggle, because I'm in the business of, defending truth and persuading people of opposing ideas. But in most of the cases, it's la, 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 I don't want to hear it. And that's why I talk about ostrich parasitic syndrome in the previous book, because while the ostrich doesn't literally bury its head in the sand, the metaphor is very apt, which is, I don't want to face reality.
It's willful blindness.
It's willful blindness. And so it's a very difficult game.
In the Egyptian mythology, the god of the state, they had a god of the state, Osiris. And Osiris was a great exploratory and nation-founding hero in his youth, awake and alert and curious, able to transform and to bring order. But as he ages, he becomes ossified, and that's sped along by the fact that he's willfully blind. That's in the Egyptian theology. Now, he has a brother, an evil brother, Seth. And Seth is the origin of the word Satan, by the way, through the Coptic Christians. And Seth is the eternal evil brother of the willfully blind king. And when Osiris is sufficiently old and sufficiently willfully blind, which means unwilling to understand the usurping motivations of his evil brother, Osiris chops him up into pieces and spreads his parts around Egypt. In fact, the Egyptians regarded each Egyptian province as a piece of Osiris, right? So that body would come together as an integrated state. When he can't kill Osiris, because Osiris is a deity, so there's no killing him, but you can make sure everything falls to pieces. So that's the blindness of institutions once established. They ossify, and then they turn a blind eye to the machinations of the usurper, right? Okay, so Osiris is now scattered all across the landscape, and so things have fallen apart, right? People say that about their own life. Everything fell apart. His wife is queen of the underworld, Isis, and she rules the domain of the underworld and chaos, which is where you go when things fall apart. And she makes her appearance, right? So that's the renewal of the social order by what? The plenitude and terror of nature. And she finds Osiris's phallus, so the vessel of the seminal idea, and she makes herself pregnant and has a son. The son is Horus. Horus is the Egyptian god of the eye, the famous Egyptian eye with the fully open pupil, and he's also a falcon, because birds of prey have the most acute vision. And Horus is willing to see, and he can see evil. And so he goes back to Egypt when he grows up, like King Arthur. He grows up alienated from his evil community, and he goes back to fight Seth. And they have a terrible battle, and Seth tears out one of his eyes. And they continue to fight, and Horus gets the eye back, and he banishes Seth to the nether regions of the cosmos. No killing him, because the force that usurps and parasitizes never dies. Okay, now he's got his eye back. Now you think he could just slap it in his head and then he could rule. That's not what happens. He goes to the land of the dead, back to the underworld, voluntarily, and he finds Osiris, his father, languishing in the underworld, in a ghostly and desiccated state. And he gives him his eye. So he provides corrupt tradition with the capacity to see. And then Osiris awakens, and they unite, and it's the union of Osiris and Horus that is the proper sovereign of the state and the soul of the pharaoh.
Nice.
Isn't that something?
That's nice. I guess that's why you love to study ancient themes to link them to current realities, right?
Well, it's so brilliant. The Mesopotamians too worshipped vision, attention, for exactly the same reason. It's exactly what we're talking about. You know, you talk about people turning a blind eye. There are none so blind as those who will not see. The deity of the revivification of the corrupt state for the Egyptians was literally the open eye. Pay attention, right? And for the Mesopotamians, it was twofold. Pay attention and speak the proper words.